Well, that was weird. The first time I hit the button, it just kind of cycled and didn't actually go live. I didn't realize it. Anywho, so I think this one's going to be fun today. I've got a second story that I want to touch on after this main one, but we're going to start. We're going to start with Marjorie Taylor Greene thing. And good morning. I see Danny, and Steve. Good morning, good morning. Good to have y'all with me. This morning, I want to talk about something that's trending on Twitter. Marjorie Taylor Greene. And, okay. Danny asks, is Marjorie Taylor Greene going through her own divorce? I'm not sure what the status of that is right now, but I believe the answer to that question is yes. But again, I'm not 100% on that, and I'm not going to be talking about that anyway. But it would be a funny little quirk of the story if that's the case, which I believe it is. But no, what we're going to talk about is MTG tweeted, and she went trending over it for a hot minute. This. So I pulled up this version of the tweet for a reason. This is the part that I probably want to talk about the most in regards to this. This is whoever this guy is, Mark Stern. He's got the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline hotline number in his bio. So, hey, good on you, brother. We've talked about the suicide thing on this show a few times, and it is an important topic, but that's not what we're talking about today. Sergeant Major's with us. He says, farm living is the life for me. And Cameron confirms that MTG is getting divorced. And good morning, Cameron. I'm glad to see that you're with us this morning, too. If not in body and spirit. Love to see that. But so, here's the tweet. She said, we need a national divorce. We need to separate by red states and blue states and shrink the federal government. Everyone I talk to says this. From the sick and disgusting woke culture issues shoved down our throats to the Democrats' traitors America last policies, we are done. Now, here's what I want to point out. Here's what I want you guys to follow on. What she's saying here, and this tweet is from yesterday, right? 8 o'clock yesterday morning. And she's from Georgia, so it doesn't. I don't know if she was in Georgia or in D.C. when she tweeted that, but the time zone's the same. So basically, this tweet happened right after I went off the show yesterday morning. The national divorce idea. Okay. So we have seen over the last several years a marked increase in violence from the left. And it is explicitly and specifically from the left. Right, the right has not had an equivalent of the Summer of Love. No matter what they want to tell you about January 6th, the idea that, it was an insurrection, it's never happened before. Bullshit. Just in the last couple of weeks, we had trans activists storm a state capitol, and that was a violent maneuver. That was not just a protest. They were making physical, violent threats in support of their political maneuver, which I will still say is not an insurrection because unless they showed serious signs that the objective was to take and hold that property, like for example establishing an autonomous zone vis-a-vis Chaz, Chop, all those, I would say that is more akin to terrorism. And there's a massive distinction between what happened there and what happened at the Capitol on January 6th, where protesters showed up and were invited in by police officers, right? Contrast that with previous activities by the left, like when they smashed down barriers to enter and attack the president, and then burned down the church across the street. There was actual violence. They made threats and carried through and conducted violence. There were a handful, I'm sure, of right-wingers on January 6th that made individual threats, but there were no specific broad category calls for violent action. Somebody will say there were people who called to hang Mike Pence. That was not the overall rallying cry. Whereas with these lefty attacks, there is always a very specific and explicit demand for such action. Alex asks, why did she delete it? I don't know, Alex, and we'll get to why we're even talking about it in just a second here. But I want you guys to know something. I want you guys to understand something. This idea of a national divorce, like I was saying, with the rise in lefty violence over the last several years, there's been a lot of talk of a new civil war. And there are basically three kind of theories on this. One, that we're heading in that direction and we need to do something. Something has to change in order to avert the second Civil War in the United States. Because of the rapidly expanding divide between the left and the right. Two, the Civil War is inevitable, and we need to start making preparations for that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And the third theory, which I think is actually probably a little more on point, is that it's already going on. And the only thing, part of that, a major factor of that third theory is that what warfare is in modernity is a very, very different creature than what it was when we had our original Civil War. Warfare today does not look like redcoats and ruffians lining up against each other and firing shot. It doesn't look like the British getting destroyed because they cling to archaic tactics of rifle lines and platoon advances and the like, while we are basically camouflaging ourselves and shooting from behind the rocks and trees and everything. That's not what warfare looks like today. Warfare today, it does include kinetic activity, right? It does include the destruction and the occupation and the capture of territory and buildings. In fact, I will go so far as to say that no matter what changes in the future as far as technology goes, war is, always has been, and always will be decided by a soldier putting boots on ground and holding ground with the threat and the power of violence. That it always has been, is currently, and always will be the final arbiter of how war is decided. Now, between conflict, dissolution, disagreement, and the actual resolution of conquered territory, there is a lot of room for lots of shenanigans. Espionage, financial espionage, hostile corporate takeover, there are many, many steps between we're pissed off and this thing's over. Boots on the ground, threat of force, we've conquered your territory. So the important thing to understand about all of those various steps, it could be a TikTok campaign, TikTok or Twitter campaign. It could be, Stryker says we are in 5th to 6th generation. He says asymmetric warfare. I'm going to correct you there, Stryker. I've discussed this on several occasions on the show. Most especially, I talked about this during the Lois Lerner incident. So with the Lois Lerner incident, what happened is she was shuffling papers to the bottom of the stack to prevent conservative groups from getting their 501c3 certification. And I pointed out, look, this is a case of, would someone please rid me of this bothersome priest type of mentality. Barack Obama never ordered Lois Lerner to take that specific action. Instead, he and his contemporaries created an environment whereby a certain select group of people would understand these actions will please the master. We're in a similar boat on the right. We are in a world where there is an environment in which we understand that there are certain actions which will have a positive long-term effect on our political objectives and outcomes. And that's important to understand. And so when I say I want to correct you, Stryker, on the use of the word asymmetric there, asymmetric warfare is more like what the original Civil War looked like and developed further into the future. Once we get to places like Afghanistan, you're talking about, instead of there being clear lines and we hold this territory and you hold this territory and we fight back and forth until somebody takes a total piece, you're surrounded. The insurrectionists are all around you, and they could come from any direction, not just in front of you. You know, in previous second and third generation tactics, that would be a flanking maneuver, and it's a specific strategic maneuver that is very effective. A flanking rear ambush, incredibly effective in a symmetric combat scenario. Then you get forward to the asymmetric scenario where you're dealing with guerrilla fighters. Guerrilla, not gorilla. Where you're dealing with guerrilla type fighters who come from anywhere and everywhere. Where we've come to now is amorphous warfare. The insurrectionists, the enemy, is no longer an identifiable individual who may come from an otherwise unpredictable direction. No. It's more like you're living in the Matrix. And anyone and everyone who hasn't been confirmed to have been unplugged from it is potentially an agent. And I mean that in all its clever implications, because I'm not just saying that anybody and everybody could potentially be already an agent, but rather all it takes is one little push from social media to convert them to the other side. Tim Pool was talking about the algorithmic manipulation of human behavior the other day, and he told a story about how he watches he watches skateboard tricks on Instagram a lot. He's a skater. That's what he does. He skateboards a lot. And then Instagram started hitting him with rollerblade videos. And all of a sudden, he's just like, you know what? I did that when I was a kid. I want to do that again. And he started rollerblading. And then he, for some reason, because he kept looking up rollerblading tricks, the algorithm started showing him magic tricks. And that turned into card tricks, specifically close hand magic card tricks. And then all of a sudden, card tricks became poker tournaments. And now he's interested in and is spending a lot of time playing poker. And he freely admitted, hey, the algorithm kind of pushed me in that direction. I hadn't thought about poker in a long time, and all of a sudden, somehow I went from skateboarding to roller skates to roller skate tricks to magic tricks to card magic to poker, and now I want to play poker all the time. And that's absolutely the way things work. You want to sell a mattress? You need to tell somebody 7 times that they want to buy a mattress, or a car, or a house, or what have you. Right? I mean, like I said, this book that is sitting on the desk behind me, The Source Book of Magic, there's a reason that I read things like that, and it's not just a prior professional curiosity. The Source Book of Magic, ooh, witchcraft, no. Comprehensive guide for neurolinguistic programming, and that is powerful stuff. So you take all that in a war where you go from we disagree on something to I have conquered territory, and all of that subtle manipulation and amorphous kinetic activity results in using neurolinguistic tactics, social contagion, algorithmic behavioral programming to alter and control things like supply lines, troop morale, right? Emplacement, tactical decision making, strategic formulation. And all those things can be affected and are being affected by algorithmic manipulation through social media. And none of you are immune to it. This is the insidious bastard of it. None of you are immune to it. Not one of you. Not unless you go live on a farm and grow all your own food and never talk to anybody. Because a piece of that algorithmic manipulation has to do with social contagion. Which means that if you personally do not even own a device which can connect to a social media account, the likelihood that you do not interact with a person who does get exposed to that emotional manipulation, that algorithmic manipulation, is next to zero in the United States of America. You may not be watching TikTok and getting pushed slowly from skateboarding to poker, but you know someone who is, and they'll talk about it. They'll tell you, oh yeah, I was talking to my wife the other day about how the dishwasher wasn't doing a good job, and all of a sudden my Facebook feed was just ads for these new dishwashers. And you know what? One of them had a garbage disposal built into the bottom of the dishwasher. Oh, no shit. I never look at Facebook, but that sounds really interesting. They don't sell that at Lowe's, do they? Right? Well, as soon as you take that from I want to buy a new dishwasher to, wow, I don't know if I can afford to have this baby. Oh, honey, let me tell you about Planned Parenthood. Well, what's that? I don't look at social media, so I've never heard of it. There you go. Now, all that said, the idea of a national divorce has been discussed because, like I said, you've got these 3 theories. And the final theory, the one that I think is probably closer to where we are, is that the Civil War is actually already going on, and you need to be cognizant of that. Because all of this social contagion, all the transgender stuff, all the LGBT stuff, all the Biden came out in the State of the Union address and said the Republicans want to cut your Medicare and Medicaid, and all the Republicans said, "Whoa, what?" He forgot to mention that he's cutting that he's trying to cut the pay of doctors from Medicare and Medicaid across the board by 4%. At a time when inflation is getting away from us, and doctors are already starting to refuse, or have been refusing for some years now, to accept new Medicare and Medicaid patients because they lose money on them. And for all you Hassan Piker shitburgers out there, a doctor being concerned with losing money is not greedy capitalism. If the doctor continues to lose money, and this is true, this would be true under a socialist system as well, if the government is losing money on the healthcare system, then that compromises his ability to serve patients. So, of course, doctors are refusing to take on new Medicare and Medicaid patients. And Biden, while accusing the Republican Party of wanting to cut Medicare, is doing exactly that, right? So you have to pay close attention to all that. Now, back to the national divorce thing. This is not entirely new. After the 2016 election, it was, in fact, the Democrats who first started talking about a national divorce because Donald Trump was such a huge threat to safety and freedom. And, he's going to go against the Constitution. If you ever hear a Democrat, if you ever hear a person who continues to vote Democrat say that they're concerned that an opponent will be a threat to the Constitution, you laugh in their faces. Because guaranteed they have voted for a gun control candidate. If I'm faced with a Democrat or a Republican that uses phrases like common sense gun control, I will not vote. I take my vote very seriously, and I think it is incredibly important to vote. Right? Soapbox, ballot box, jury box, cartridge box. In that order. I think it is incredibly important to vote. This is my soapbox. I go to the ballot box. I am familiar with the jury box. I've been thrown off it a few times. And I have, please believe, a cartridge box at the ready. That is why the ballot box is so incredibly important. And that's why the national divorce conversation seems so interesting to the left. They started talking about it after the 2016 election. It's been something they've discussed quite a bit. They started talking about it again leading up to 2020 when they were going on and on and on about how Trump was going to win, or Trump was going to win the Electoral College but lose the popular vote and then refuse to leave office. And if he did that, then we'd need to do something about it. And they have these articles and articles and articles about it. For example, Democrats came out what to do if Trump wins the Electoral College but loses the popular vote. Right, this is from September 8th in 2020. And I got to be careful what I read here because this guy makes some of the claims that we're not allowed to say. The left secretly preps for MAGA violence after Election Day is the name of an article where, and guys, like I pulled up the link that he has linked in the archive here. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to this article in the chat for you guys. Go read the Daily Beast article, The Left Secretly Preps for MAGA Violence After Election Day. I think we actually covered this article back before the election, right after it came out. But it's extreme. It's incredibly extreme. And violence is absolutely on the table for these guys. They say, while the sheer number of groups, this is an excerpt from that article, while the sheer number of groups and volunteers involved in the effort has given organizers hope, there is some fear that they may not all be operating from the same playbook. Two sources involved with the FBT fight back table discussions say they worry Biden would concede a contested election too early with an eye toward ensuring a peaceful transition of power. Biden would concede a contested election too early. Right? Okay. So, the election was contested. It was very contested, and it was very close. Without making any claims about the legitimacy of it, it was a contested election. There was a great deal of contention, and there were some very significant concerns completely apart from any of the, shall we say, mechanical issues. So it was very much a contested election, and Biden didn't concede, and Trump did. Trump actually did concede. Believe it or not, he didn't concede immediately, nor should he have. But the basically they go on to talk about this national divorce idea, and of course, a national divorce is super compelling and interesting to the left. It's a theoretically less violent alternative to an open civil war. And why do you think that a less violent national divorce would be preferable to the left over a civil war? It's not just because if they find themselves in an actual kinetic civil war, will they be fighting the armed people, right? There's a good case to be made that their primary concern should be that going into a kinetic civil war, it's the right that has all the guns. Let me clue you into something here, lefties. This is a freebie. If you've been brave enough to click on this channel to begin with, this is a freebie. So are all the institutions that you think are going to help you. Police unions, vote Democrat. The police, by majority, do not. The Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force, overwhelmingly conservative. And they know, and they're reminded frequently that the oath they took was to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Guess who else is conservative by a wide margin? All of your farmers. They want what comes after a civil war that they've won. But if they got the civil war that they think they want, they would quickly find that they were at war against all of the guns and all of the food. Now, that said, the national divorce. No, I'm not in. I'm not interested. I do not want to dissolve the country. Because what that looks like is not, oh, yay, we're 50 free individual sovereign states and we go back to a more diverse and complex and free individual laboratories of liberty and democracy type of model. That's not what that looks like. What that looks like is the United States has been dissolved, and along with it, the power of a combined military force and the national security that gives us. And the immediate result is that China and Russia come and fight a war for who gets to take control. And Russia is not strong enough to win that war. We become the United States of China overnight. With a rifle in my hand, I am easily worth 100 Chinese soldiers in a fight. I'm certain. And that doesn't matter when they can send 1 million at me. Right? I may be worth more than you can imagine. But that's not the same as being worth more than they have. The numbers are terrifying. Stryker says UN assets are on all college campuses at this point. Yeah, there's a statement that I'm not going to make on here. Okay. I need to put a pin in it there and get on down the road. I've got some work to do this morning, but I do want to I do want to pop this one up real quick because I talked about Biden's trip to Ukraine yesterday. They are going off today about this picture of Biden walking around in the Ukraine. Bunker boy hid in a bunker when peaceful protesters were protesting police brutality outside of the White House. For starters, shitburger, your bunker boy. Okay, so Donald Trump, while peaceful protesters were burning down the church across the street. Right, I mentioned that a minute ago, right? When the peaceful protesters went to the White House, they set fire to a building, and not just any building. They burned a church. Now, many of the reports that came out at the time said that Trump was told by Secret Service that, Mr. President, you need to get into the bunker, and he refused to go. Believe it or not, the commander-in-chief's authority does not override the Secret Service when it comes to the question of the commander-in-chief's safety. Now, he can willfully bully them, absolutely. And there's a reason that there's a certain type of body that's put in the Secret Service uniform that says, fuck you, Mr. President. You will comply for your safety. Now, there's a level of ego that gets involved there, where somebody's going to win that argument. But the law is on the side of the Secret Service for the purposes of putting the president safely in the bunker when people are burning the building. Okay, so shit right up your nose, echo politics on that. But then he goes on here. Dark Brandon walked into the middle of a battlefield and showed support for Ukraine, a fellow democracy. Does this image look like he's in the middle of a battlefield? You see all those bomb craters? Shut the fuck up. Let me tell you something. I have been on battlefields. I've been on battlefields while shit was blowing up around me. I've been engaged in kinetic military activity. I've seen men blown absolutely to pieces by the ravages of a cowardly enemy firing 80mm recoilless rifles like they're lobbing mortars over walls into tents. This image is not a battlefield. But bunker boy, as you call him there, echo politics, Donald Trump, and this is something you're going to see going forward. And I may have to cut it short about this in particular. This is something you're going to see going forward into presidencies in the future. I will be surprised if we have another president ever that doesn't try to pull a stunt like this. Because when Donald Trump walked across the demilitarized zone to shake hands with Kim Jong-un, that was an unprecedented display of American testicular fortitude. That could not have been a more masculinizing and courageous and brash maneuver than if he had walked into Un's private offices and dropped his nutsack on the table. And so going forward, because Donald Trump set that bar, that if you're going to be the commander-in-chief of the United States of America military, you are going to be the man who commands the world's most powerful force of kinetic violence, then you have to have a sack of nuts so big that you can stand to walk into the enemy's house and shake his hand and sit down to have a cup of tea. This next bit, I don't say to brag. It's going to sound like a bit of a brag, but it's to make a broader point. When I was deployed in Afghanistan, we were invited by one of the local power brokers. I won't say his name. Actually, I'm prevented by the law from saying his name. But we were invited by one of the local power brokers, and this was the guy who personally wrote the paychecks for the Afghan National Police in the district where we were working. This was the guy that owned all the land. He was the big boss man, right? And like, okay, I said I wouldn't say his name, and I won't say his name, but he had the title of Haji, right? So that means that he's somebody who went to Mecca and back, who completed the Hajj. And that's a major deal. That's a very, very big deal in that culture. That is a mark of religious accomplishment, which has extraordinary political implications, especially for somebody who commands a large amount of land and wealth, like those local leaders do. And we went and sat and had dinner with him. And when I say we, there were about 8 or 10 of us, and we sat down to have dinner with him and his 2 or 3 lieutenants and a handful of security guards. The entire time we were there, he had personal guards posted in the corners of the room, and we had lookouts posted around the room as well. And we sat at this table. We set our rifles on the ground beside us. We didn't have them slung. We didn't have them at some kind of ready position. We set our rifles down on the ground beside us. We took our body armor off and set it down on the ground with our weapons beside us. And we sat down and had fried chicken and pickled okra, which, by the way, was delicious. And there was one guy at the table that kept eyeballing one of our soldiers. And after dinner, we had to talk about that a little bit, because of the way this one guy was eyeballing one of our soldiers. Right? I'm talking to you, Dirty, by the way. If you happen to tune in sometime, I know you remember this, Dirty. And we had to tell Dirty, you didn't recognize the guy, did you? No, what's up? Like, yeah. You shot his brother yesterday. It was a clean kill. It was, there was an ambush, there was a firefight. Dirty shot a guy in a combat situation. It was clean. But then we sat down to have dinner with the boss man, and one of his security guards was the brother of the guy that one of our party had shot the day before. So when I'm telling you about the courage, the brazenness, and the unmitigated temerity to walk in and sit down to discuss peace with the enemy, Biden is bragging about going and walking through a war zone with the ally who he has to date laundered over $100 billion of U.S. taxpayer money to, and just went over there to give him another $500 million in military equipment at a time when, hey, Hassan Piker, you want to piss and moan about how much money Mr. Beast spent on curing the blind? How about taxpayer dollars not going to clean up a chemical spill? Right? It might be one thing if it weren't for Biden saying explicitly that he will not provide federal aid in East Palestine, Ohio, at the same time that he's giving more money to a country through which he has already laundered $100 billion just in the last 365 days. That's not even talking about all of the corruption and money laundering that the Biden family has clearly been engaged with in the Ukraine for the last 40 or 50 years. That $100 billion, that's just the last 365 days. And he wants me, and he wants you and the American people to think that going and grab-assing with this fucking comedian is the same as walking into hostile territory to break bread with the enemy and discuss peace. This is the cowardice that our fellow Americans voted for. And let me be very clear about something on that. You may have suspicions about the legitimacy, the security of the election. You may have very reasonable suspicions. I don't want to address those right now. I want to make this point. No matter how much of any of that may or may not have occurred, the fact of the matter is there are still Americans who not only voted for Joe Biden, but will do so again, no matter what. No matter what. They will vote blue no matter who. And he wants you to think that going over to have tea with your best friend is the same as breaking bread with the enemy. That is cowardice, deceit, and gaslighting on a level that I heretofore could not have imagined. So, I got to get down the road. I love you guys. Thanks for watching. And Cam will be back with us tomorrow for Woke Wednesday. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.